All right, good evening, everyone. I am so excited. Welcome back. Welcome back. We are finishing our Broken Pieces virtual book launch. And I just want to say that I am so grateful for all of you who have participated, reshared, text, inbox, and everything else. And so the excitement of what's happening and what I am doing, I really do feel your prayers. I also do feel your support. So we're not going to be long tonight. We're going to answer a couple of questions concerning childhood trauma and just overall how to handle childhood trauma or just trauma. Like, how do we handle it? And should we respond to trauma? And so we're going to dive right on in with some of our questions that we have tonight. Our first question, I do have my husband helping me with the questions. And so if you want to go ahead and put a question in the comment box, feel free, go right ahead. Or if you just want to inbox that question, he is still here to check, my inbox with any question you may have that you may not feel comfortable with asking publicly. But nevertheless, I'm excited. So let's go ahead. What's our first question?
Our first question is, what does healing from childhood trauma mean to you personally?
Personally, healing from childhood trauma, it means that I am not ashamed of what I experienced, and it no longer have control over me emotionally, physically, and mentally. And I know a lot of times when we are dealing with trauma, it takes a huge role on all those things, mentally, the physical, all aspects of who you are. Because just as I talked about last night, when we're talking about trauma, the idea of trauma is to stop you. It's to delay you. It's to affect your progression, your development, and growth in life. And so when I think of my personal definition or how I feel that I know that when it comes to healing, I just know that when I'm able to see that the residue is not the residue. I don't carry the residue of what happened to me anymore.
Next question is, what has been the most challenging part of facing your childhood wounds?
The most challenging part is offense, making sure that you don't offend others, particularly because I am very I'm very always, not always, but I'm very cautious to make sure that I'm not trying to put or point a finger to do the blame game. And so I knew that it was very important that I shared the perspective of what I experienced, but I'm not coming out looking to find someone to blame, because that's the thing about it, is that when we go through a lot of our healing, we believe that we have to point the finger at someone to blame. Now there is different times when there is someone who intentionally did something to you, but in the sense of what I am talking about, this is not to where someone intentionally tried to hurt me, but didn't know what to do. And so I always think that is when people do what they can with what they have. And so when people don't have the full resource and their resources are limited, they can only do what they can possibly do with you. But it also does cause the trauma. And so that's what I'm acknowledging, is that when you are limited on resources and support and different things like that, how it does affect your children, but also that realizing that when coming out of trauma, the best thing you can do is not try to look for someone to blame.
The next question is about the impact of childhood trauma. It is often said that childhood trauma shapes your identity, your relationships, and coping mechanisms. What are some of the other impacts of childhood trauma?
One of the impacts that I've come to realize that that affects children when they are young, when they are going through childhood trauma, is the education part. When childhood trauma, when we think of, we don't talk about it a lot, but how studies show that it does affect the overall growth of the child development. And also, of course, financial stability and different things like that. But also, so we're talking about the education part. We're talking about how they are not as one to advance in school with learning because of what the trauma that they are facing. But along with that, it's also the physical part, the healthy part. A lot of times when kids are in the state of focusing on their trauma, they are not making conscious health decisions. And so it does play a role on the physical aspect and, of course, the educational aspect of who the child is, because their trauma is training them. Their trauma is grooming them. And they're only seeing the world out through the lens of their trauma. So they don't aspire to be the best student in the classroom. They don't aspire to live in a sense of healthy eating. And so because their trauma is grooming them and shaping them, the only thing they do is just live for the moment. They don't live in the sense of the future, because the desire and the concern of the future, because of hopelessness, has consumed them. So they make decisions based off of currently what they are experiencing right now.
Would you say that low self-esteem, um, difficulty trusting others, anxiety, would you say that those are also things that um, that are it affects childhood trauma?
Absolutely, absolutely. Low self-esteem is always a huge key when you're dealing with individuals who have dealt with past trauma, because their esteem is so low that you're actually trying to speak to them, even though they're an adult. You're still speaking to the little child that's within them. And so when we talk about self-esteem and how it's so important to make sure as parents that we are grooming and we are giving the words of encouragement and giving kids language to their identity. A lot of times when they don't experience that when they're young, they look for others to affirm them in their identity. And if I give you whatever I think that you are, they just accept it. And so that low self-esteem is a huge aspect into dealing with unmet childhood trauma, and how it just does play a huge role. Even the anxiety. A lot of times we see to where anxiety is something that's also groomed with trauma, because you're anxious and you're nervous. You have it to where you're always anxious about something because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And so that anxiety is something that you sit on the side and you just wait for something else to happen. And so you have moments or seasons to where you live in the anxiety and in the depression. And so I always say that when you're dealing with a lot of trauma, you don't know left from right, you don't know up from down, you're just consumed with it. And so a lot of times when that being consumed, that you feel as if you're in a very dark place and you're in a place to where you don't know how to make healthy, conscious decisions.
That's good. So would you say it is important as adults to pay attention to and not just kind of take it as these are just parts of this is just who I am. This is just my personality. I'm just nervous. It's just difficult for me to trust people. That's just how I've always been. Would you say that it's important for adults to pay attention to things like that to see where you can track that to your childhood trauma?
Absolutely. I think as adults, we have the responsibility to not use a lazy language of just saying, this is just my personality. And I would just share my experience with that is that sometimes, growing up, it would always be, well, I'm just shy. But it was more so I would just take that on and use that as a shield so that no one really asks me what's really happening with me, because one, I was afraid to really share my emotions, and then two, I didn't trust. And so when you have that, you have to be the adult and stop giving in and allowing that lazy conversation. Well, that's what they said, that's what I'll just take. But really asking them, and digging, we call it like digging deep, like, don't just give a one word answer, but, allowing kids to actually feel like, how are you feeling? Like in this moment, what is your emotion? In this moment, how are you feeling? And I think we're starting with that really does set the scene to continue the conversation, to dive into more, and not allowing kids to just say, oh, that's just my personality, I'm shy. But a lot of times that's just a shield to protect them, because that's really there. And I always would say trauma, but that really is to what trauma has many components to it. The best way to describe your trauma is like a transformer. We know that the Transformer cartoon and everything else, when we think about it, it transforms into whatever is needed in that moment. So if I know that I'm sitting in a room to where I am very uncomfortable, I can transform into saying, I'm just shy. I don't feel, but really, because my trauma has the ability to transform into what's needed in that moment, I'm able to go ahead and just fit into that, and they'll be there. Oh, she's just shy. She's okay. And then be left alone. So we have to be very cautious of those moments when that does happen with kids, especially when it's a continuation. Like every time, like, no, we have to dig into that.
one of the first steps to dealing with childhood trauma is acknowledging it. It is the recognition that it is there. And maybe my trauma is not as intense as yours, but something is probably there. There was something that happened that traumatized you. Talk to us about shame. One of the things you talk about in your book is dealing with the shame that comes with trauma. A lot of people avoid acknowledging that it's there because I'm ashamed of it. Talk to us about handling that shame.
The first thing I want to go back to is I talked about a lot of times how we have to stop comparing trauma to the next person.
Good.
Because the thing about it is that trauma is trauma. I said it the other night. Trauma is like a bullet. Once that bullet is released, it can hit anyone. It can affect anyone. And so I would never compare my trauma to someone else's trauma as if to say, well, my trauma is bigger. But that's something that we have to be very cautious of doing, because what that does is that if you make someone feel like their story is not as significant or doesn't carry a certain amount of weight just because of what you experienced, you have to be very cautious, because that's what trauma does. It creates the level of shame. And I think that we have to know that when shame comes, we are able to hide behind the shame and live a life of shame, and it paralyzes us, and it allows us to it almost makes us feel as if I'm filled with so much shame that I'm not even deserving of seeing the sun rise tomorrow. And we have to be very careful of that, because it puts you into a depression. It puts you into not just the anxiety of what tomorrow may possibly hold, but it also even makes you feel like I'm not even concerned about what tomorrow holds, because I don't want to be here. And so when we are trying to compare again trauma stories, the thing about it is that trauma is trauma. The job of trauma is to basically kill anybody, to hurt everyone. And so when that shame comes in, we have to be very cautious to not allow when that shame is almost as if that's just who I am, and we've conformed to it. We have allowed it to where not only are we saying that this is the truth of how I'm supposed to live, and now it creates to where we're stuck in almost like a box, a trauma box. And sometimes I talk about this in the book, to sometimes it's easier to give over to trauma, and it seems like it's harder to untangle yourself from the trauma. It's easier for me to just accept my childhood generational curses and everything else. Like it felt like, and when you compare the two, it felt like that was easier. And the hard work comes when you start realizing, like, that was a lie. I'm actually worthy. I don't have to live like this. That's not how I should be thinking. That's not how I should be living. And it seemed like the real hard work comes when you are undoing the trauma. You're untying yourself from the trauma. You're trying to come out of the box of the trauma. And so I always say that the best thing that you could ever do is to find it to where the truth is like an axe to cut the cord, an axe to cut everything. And so when you find those moments of truth, when you feel shame and you feel those moments of shame, you have to at least speak one good thing. And you gave this also, you talked about acknowledging the truth, being okay with acknowledging, even if I don't feel like it in this moment, I'm a inch up to it and say, you know what? If I used to say I'm horrible, I'm okay with showing progress and saying I'm good. I'm okay. I'm getting better. So changing those language, because I don't want anyone to think that this thing happens overnight and it happens so fast. No, I can say now that my language has changed. I may not be able to say I'm great, I'm wonderful, but I can at least say I'm doing better. I'm getting there. I'm seeing progress. And so we allow ourselves to start saying those words. The thing about that trauma, it gets a notification on your heart and on your mind. Your mind begins to think differently. Your viewpoint begins to change. And so if you just start with saying those little things, with acknowledging, you know what, yesterday I felt horrible, but today I'm going to do my best. I'm not going to give in to how I felt yesterday. And so we have to make sure that the language with acknowledgement, I always say the best thing I love is when you go to an AA meeting. And they don't necessarily ask you what your addiction is. They address your name. You speak your name, and then maybe eventually it loads up to where, and I was addicted to whatever. But I think that when we identify ourselves by our name first, it gives us something in our mind that says, you know what? Chiquitha is worthy of something. This may have been my pain, but my name alone means something. And so when we find the value just in the beginning stages, because I'm going to be very honest, it's a lot. It's difficult to come out of. But if we just find it in the beginning stages of just realizing that I make peace with my name, I make peace. I know what my struggle was. I know what my trauma was, but I'm learning to make peace. And then from there, I begin to find a level of gratitude into who I am.
That's so good. So I hear you saying, don't allow whatever your trauma was, whatever the situation was, don't allow that to be the thing that defines
Because sometimes, and I always say, like, because I'm a first grade teacher and I love kids. And one thing that I always tell people, don't label the child. Even in those moments of frustration, we understand, but we have to be very cautious to not label the child. And I think what was horrible for me in my experience is that I automatically was labeled. And in the sense that I was labeled because I didn't have the same last name. And so I was always looked at as a different individual. And so it put a label on me, not intentionally in certain situations, but it did. And so when we are walking around labeling people, and we don't know their story, we don't know their trauma, we label them from their trauma and not having the full story. And so we have to be careful when we allow trauma to label us. Because I could have walked around and said, I didn't have a father, which I did. And I started to realize even then when I was younger, how that started to groom me and how that started to change my perspective about life and how it just made me so, just angry every time I had to say that. And I think that for me, it was so huge for me to untie that name, untie how that trauma, how that connected me in a sense to where it was taking so much control over me.
That's so good. One of the things that you said in the book is trauma can make you hide, it can make you isolate, it can make you pretend. Talk to us about the imposter syndrome. What role does trauma play in the imposter syndrome?
The thing about trauma, it's a liar. It's a lie. It means no good for you. And I think that when we realize that we are allowing something to make us feel as if we're not qualified, but someone else is more qualified, and we push everyone else to be great, and we're not pushing ourselves to see great, we have it to where we'll self-sabotage and create the imposter syndrome. Because we'll sit in a room that we know we worked hard for. We know we showed up every day to be there, and we went into work and we did all these things. But then the moment that we are asked to stand before or even attend a gathering, whatever it is, to where we have to show up in our true self and not the part that has been challenged to where the enemy doesn't want us to understand, but standing in the true self and the true person that we are, that imposter syndrome can become automatic because we haven't dealt with the fact that my true value. And I always say that when it comes to value and the imposter syndrome, they work tight neck and neck, because the enemy wants to convince you so much that you are not qualified that he will create an entire individual to come around, and it's called self-sabotage, imposter syndrome. This is you, and this is the enemy allowing something else to come in front of you, telling you are not good enough, but you're still back here jumping in and everything else. But what's holding you down, what's anchoring you, is the fact that you never dealt with that self-worth, that value of self, that loving who you are and loving who you are becoming. And so when we don't deal with that root, we're going to always see the imposter syndrome stand up first before we actually stand up for ourselves.
That's good. Next question is, how does unhealed trauma impact adult relationships and parenting?
Communication. Communication. That unhealed trauma still is teaching you and coaching you how to talk, how to convey, how to feel, how to love, how to talk, all those things. And so the huge thing about it is that I always say to when talking to kids, I meet them where they are, not where they're going. And if I'm still stuck in a state of a traumatic state, what I'm conveying to you is how you're conveying to me is going to come out very rude, disrespectful, not trustworthy. You don't trust me. And so what I have to do is that I have to show myself in a different light from how you've shown other individuals. And so if we do not deal with that communication, of what trauma has scoped us into believing how we should perceive others, and believing that everyone is against us, no one is for us. I'm not good enough to be a part of this community or this friendship. I'm not even qualified to be a great mother. I'll just mother from the aspect of my trauma, or I was taught this, and not really realizing that motherhood or parenting in itself is something that is developed throughout time. It's not something that you just get in a moment to where that baby is delivered, but it is something, a continuation that you're going to always learn, that you're going to always find more ways to be better in. But the thing about it is that trauma lets you think that there's one lane only, there's only one way to communicate, when honestly speaking, there's almost over 7,000 ways of communication and language. And so if I'm only speaking from the state of my trauma, then I'm allowing myself to stay there. I'm not realizing that there's diverse ways of communication. There's over 100 emotions in itself. And so when we think about how we are communicating, we communicate from our emotions, how we feel. But if you're still stuck in that emotion of not trusting, you're never going to find the language to assist you in those friendships, in that parenthood. You're going to always stay stuck to where you're going to feel as if you're not good enough. And so when you think about being not good enough, you're going to find it to where you disqualification and a little anger as well, because you're going to see it to where that anger of self or judgment of self has a thing to where it affects your value. So even if you're in a conversation with someone who is a very good friend, you're going to find ways to where you're going to feel like, I don't deserve this friend. And so it sabotages the relationship. It makes them have to overly work to prove to you that you're good enough to be in that friendship with them. Or even in parenthood, you're going to try to overly compensate the fact that there is something lacking. And honestly speaking, when we are trying to overcompensate in any aspect and not really realizing there's a huge void there, that is a disadvantage and a disservice, because you're going to always find it to where it does not have you don't have what it takes in that moment to actually give that person, and maybe realizing that, hey, I need to go back to the drawing board and realize, what is this coming from? Why am I thinking like this? Why do I see myself, or why do I disqualify myself when it comes to anything, or friendships, parenthood? And it more than likely is connected to your trauma.
Next question is, what role does forgiveness play in the healing process? Forgiveness is a big deal. Am I allowed to hold on and remain bitter and angry, throughout this journey, or do I have to learn to forgive?
Now everybody take a deep breath. I'm sorry to break it to you. You have to forgive. Forgive. You have to forgive. But here's the thing. The first step to healing is honestly forgiving yourself first. Because if you have that level of empathy for self, it'll make it easier to find that empathy for someone else. And I think what happens is that we live in a world where everyone is so judgmental and so harsh because they lack inward empathy for themselves. And I think that when we are seeing individuals who are just very like, throw a stone, kill them dead. And it's almost like, it always makes me wonder, how do they feel about themselves when they make a mistake? And a lot of times you do find it to where, people all the time, like I'm in the grocery store and they're just like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. It's like they go into an entire new person. And it's kind of like, I have to say like, no, it is okay. But they're not really coming from the place of what just happened. They're coming from the place of their trauma and it's realizing that, hey, you haven't forgiven yourself about what happened. And so I always say that you have to forgive yourself first, and find empathy within, so that you can show empathy towards anyone else that affected you in that trauma. And so we have to realize that healing is a process to where you're going to have to do the work for yourself first. Because what happens if you never get the apology from the person who hurt you? What if you never see the person who hurt you? What if the person ended up passing away and you never? So are you going to walk the earth with the fact that I never got an apology from them and they're no longer here? And it's kind of like you're doing yourself a disservice, because they probably, may have forgotten, or whatever the case is, and you're still holding on to something that God is like, please just give me that. Just give me that. I know it hurt. I was there. I know it all. But I think we have to become very reliant on the fact that even in trauma, God still knew a way to heal us from it. And when we stop thinking that God is just one God, where he can only bless you financially, he can only heal and everything else, and not realizing that trauma is a part of that list of healing, then we'll start realizing like, hey, God has the answer for this. He has the answer for this. And the answer may be, let me fix myself. God is telling me to work on myself. Because one thing about it is that you may end up seeing the person in the street or anything else. How are you going to respond? Because remember, trauma creates characteristics. A lot of people who are, in that moment or in that box, I would say, they are still working off of the characteristics of their pain. That's your pain. That's really not you. That's your pain talking. We're seeing a display of your pain. We're seeing the display of insufficiency. We're seeing a display of not being affirmed as a child. We're seeing that loneliness and that bitterness. And so we like to prejudge when people are acting out. But if we were to sit for a moment and actually realize, like, no, that's a trauma moment. That's something else that's working. I know what we're seeing. We're seeing the rage. We're seeing the anger. We're seeing all these things. But there is something else in that's down there that's so deep and so heavy that the person has just said, this is just me. This is just how I speak. Not so, because that doesn't make sense. If we're going to live by the word of God, then we have to know that our actions have to also resemble. So why is it that we feel as if that our trauma has to continue, or rather our personalities have to reflect the pain that we went through? And so when we start realizing that a lot of times that, again, that characteristics of our trauma, it plays a huge role in how we display ourselves and everything else. So back to your answer, your question, the answer is that the first thing with healing is to forgive yourself.
That's good, because forgiveness can be a difficult thing to embrace.
Absolutely.
When you feel like you have the right to be angry or hurt or mad or whatever, like I have the right to hold on to this, but it's like you are keeping yourself in a prison by not choosing to let it go and move forward.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, I always, I'm always like saying, like, just let it go. Like when we're like casting out demons, one of my favorite things that I used to love to, and I used to finally get around to it. Now let it go. I'm gonna call everything else out but let it go. Because we have to realize that in those moments that we feel like, you know what, I feel justified to feel like this. I feel justified to act like this. But then we also have to realize in those moments that we felt justified to respond, we have to also realize how we made vows to that thing as well. And so now not only does the pain from what someone else did to us is there, now the vows that you felt justified enough to say and become is there now as well. So now you have a dual thing to where, because of the trauma, I started to behave like this, and because I felt justified because of the pain, I started doing this. I started behaving like this. And so we have to be very cautious of that.
That's good. So it's safe to say when I am displaying behavior that is not indicative of my true nature, I can say to myself, you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and this behavior is not reflecting that.
Absolutely.
So you need to let that go.
Absolutely. And it's okay for us to realize that even in us saying like let it go, it's not saying like it's gonna happen overnight, but start inching into it. Start realizing that, hey, I'm holding on to this and it's not good.
Yeah. That's really good. Do you believe that healing from childhood trauma is a lifelong process?
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with that, because we have to be very cautious of, because sometimes we know what was there, but then we also have to realize that there are some things that we may not have seen, we may have missed. It's just like cleaning your house, and you sit down, you're like, I'm so happy I cleaned my house, and then you start sitting there for a while, and you're like, oh, I missed a spot. Oh, that's there. And I think once we sit down and we realize like we have to be, oh, I missed this. Oh, I forgot about this. Because a lot of times what happens with trauma is that we sometimes black things and situations out that it's not until something, a smell, a song, or something happens, and it's like, oh my gosh, I forgot that happened. But because I blacked it out and I pushed it down so far, you have to be willing to know that I have to fix this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Here's another question, and something that I would love to hear your thoughts on. You have taken this journey as a wife, mother, teacher, daughter, sister, friend, all of these different roles. You have taken this journey while maintaining all of these different relationships. How can loved ones best support someone who is healing from childhood trauma?
I always say, I would say for me personally, I think it was not saying, no, that's not true. That's not how you felt. And I think we have to be very cautious of that, to say to say to someone, no, that's not what happened. That's not how you felt. And it's like the audacity, or like almost like that's not that, so we have to be very cautious when we try to basically downplay someone else's trauma. And it, like almost like, no, that didn't happen. No, you didn't feel like that. No, that's not why you were responding like that. And so we have to be very cautious, because now, and I just talked about this, that we have to be very cautious when we're saying, when people are justifying their hurt, because this just justified that, why this is why I didn't say nothing. This is why I wasn't comfortable with saying anything, because of how you're responding now. And granted, it could be 5 years later, 10 years later, however time it's been, but we have to make sure to show real support to anyone that's dealing with any form of trauma, whether you're the friend, the spouse, the co-worker, and they are sharing their trauma story with them. The best thing that you can do is to say, how can I be a support to you now? I'm sorry that was your emotion. That is what you experienced. But how can I be a support to you now? How can I make sure that this journey that you have been on, that you have been so committed to, how can I assist you on this journey to make sure that basically that you keep seeing progression?
That's good. Now, this next question contains a cuss word. What boundaries are important to set during the healing process? So you're on this journey, and we don't always like that B word, and we don't always like to respect.
That's word. Your cuss word.
So what boundaries are important to set in place while you're on this journey?
I think that I know that one of the most important boundaries for yourself has to be no negotiation. Like, don't negotiate. Don't try to convince others of this is what you went through. Creating those boundaries really do have it to where, if you don't understand, I can accept the fact that you don't understand, and that's okay. But I'm not going to sit and negotiate with you to make you feel as if I'm making this up. And so I think that we have to learn, like, when we think about negotiation, it's the going back and forth. It's the, do you agree? Do you not agree? And I think we have to automatically say, I'm not negotiating. I am not negotiating, because not with that statement alone lets us know I'm not negotiating my worth, my time, my energy, or anything else, because I'm on this journey enough. And so because I'm on this journey by itself, it's an emotional journey at times. And so it has it to where if you allow it and you don't manage it correctly, it can become very tiresome. And I think that we have to be very cautious even with that when we are on that healing journey, because the enemy wants to convince us that this journey is too big and too much to handle. And so it wants to overwhelm us. And so we have to be very cautious of that. But I know that having the understanding that I am not going to negotiate my value, my time, or my worth, or anything else. No negotiations. Nope. So I think that is very important.
More questions, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Did you discover anything surprising about yourself while writing this book and taking this journey?
I actually did. looking at the different characteristics of and just studying a lot about trauma and everything else, I learned a lot of things about me. And at the time, I didn't have the correct verbiage. And I always say that when you find the correct verbiage about different things, it gives an aha moment, like that's what that was, or it's like a light bulb moment. And so for me, I had a lot of light bulb moments, like, oh, so that's what that really was, not what I was saying it was, but that's what this really was. And I think for me, it was really understanding that the reason why I show up so much for others is because I wish someone showed up for me. And so I thought that it was just something because I was just a nurturer, which I am. But there was another aspect of that because I had to revisit times to where I wish somebody would have just showed up for me with no strings attached, anything else, with someone just taking me in and just providing what I needed outside of my mother and outside of family members. But someone just saying, and it's almost like to show up in the sense of also sacrificing their comfortability. And I think that for me is I'm more so willing to sacrifice. I was more so willing to sacrifice what I was accustomed to, or what I was used to doing, for the sake of someone else, and it being okay, and me not apologizing for it, and me feeling great about it, because I wish someone would have done the same for me. And I think it was something that I grieved over, because it almost makes you feel as if there were so many moments and chances where someone could have absolutely shown up for me. Someone could have absolutely shown up for me, taking the fact that whatever I was doing, how I was behaving, and realize that, hey, there's something else going on. And I think that for me, it showed how individuals can be impatient with your trauma. And I think that's why I felt justified to holding my pain and feeling like I this is my pain and I just have to carry it. And I think a lot of times when we are warped into thinking that we have to deal with that trauma, that's how I felt. I felt that I wish someone would have just came in and understood, who knew the story, who knew my pain, and said, I know you are acting like this because of your pain and because of your trauma, not because you want to. And so that's something that I really realized, and I think that's why I am. I believe that I'm empathetic in the sense that I don't allow individuals to overuse me, but I always go back to saying, and I think I say this a lot: what happened to them? What happened to them? Because I feel like no one. Oh God, here it goes. Felt that. I feel like no one came in and said to me, what happened to her? Like, what happened to her to make her act out like this? And I feel like no one went to my origin story, my genesis, my upbringing, even when I was that young, to say, we're going to make sure that this does not condition her to make her feel like she's not good enough or qualified, or make her feel like she's not qualified. And so,
so you realize that you felt judged, and you really just had the desire for stop misunderstanding me.
Yeah.
But recognize that there may be something deeper going on.
Absolutely. And I feel like a lot of times, and I always say that I'm sometimes misunderstood, because I still feel like some in moments people are not as patient with me as I am as patient with others. And I could be wrong. This is just me personally, my personal feelings. But one thing that I do know, and I do just wish that someone was just as patient with me and just really just brought me into realizing that I was behaving and acting the way I was acting based off the fact that I just wanted to be loved and accepted and acknowledged and feel worthy and everything else like that. So just all of that, those are the things that I just wanted to feel as a little girl, but I didn't know how. And I talked about in the book how a lot of times to where when you become, you do better when you know better. But but my problem is that I didn't know any better because I didn't know what to do. And so I didn't learn how to do better until I hit maybe 16, maybe even 18 years old, how to actually handle that pain and how to actually act out. So those years before I got to 16 or 18 years old, you saw a lot of misbehaving. You saw a lot of behavioral problems. You saw a lot of anger. You saw all these things coming out of me because I didn't know what to do with my emotions, because no one gave me the verbiage or even a space to feel how I felt. It was just life goes on. And I had to say, oh, life goes on. Got to keep rolling, you know? And so it wasn't until I became of age. I talk about it in the book as grownish, in a sense, like I know I'm grown, but I don't feel grown at all. I've been doing this since I was little. I've been, you know, and so it's just more so it was being raised by a single parent. We see this a lot of times, that the oldest kid or the kids, they have a responsibilities of their parenting themselves. And so sometimes there was moments to where I know for a fact I am parenting myself and I don't know what to do, you know. So that's really what that was about.
All right, I have one more for you. Is it okay if I read a small excerpt from the book?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to read a small excerpt from the book to give you guys a sneak peek. This actually brought tears to my eyes, and I'm struggling to read this right now.
Oh,
but I want to give this piece because I believe that your story is not unlike the story of many others. Those that you even know that are dealing with not having a father in their lives and in the picture. One of your sections is called No Funeral for the Living. There's something especially painful about grieving someone who is still alive. I had no funeral, no closure, no pictures, no stories, no belongings, no memories to cherish, just a name. A name I didn't ask for, a name I didn't understand, a name that made me feel like a stranger in my own family. That's so hard. What would you say to someone whose story may be similar to this, whose pain may be similar to this? Maybe they know something about their father, but still wasn't in the picture. What would you say to someone who's completely broken? Where do you even start? Like, today I'm broken, this hit me in the chest. Where do I even start? How do I even begin the process of healing from this?
You know, I can only share with how I started my own process with finding healing with something as huge, with growing up and not feeling as if you were a part of a family, or you know, or and so I think that I know for me, my biggest resolve, and that which gives me strength every day, is to know that trauma doesn't define the rest of my story. And I had to stop. I had to come out of the light that I was. I know that it was trying to convince me of, that this is going to be the rest. This pain, I'm going to carry this pain for the rest of my life. And I know, so I had to realize that I owed it to myself to step into the truth. I've been given the truth, and now I owe it to myself to own up and to take responsibility of what I can control. And I know that for me personally, when you're young, you're seeking ways to try to control it. But it's not until you actually get older and you become an adult that you have to realize, you know what? I could take ownership of what I'm capable of actually doing. And so I think that is realizing that you can't change the past. I hope this is answering the question. You cannot change the past. You cannot change how you got here, who helped you get to the earth. You can't change all of that. I used to make this joke in grammar school. I used to say, you know, the only reason I'm here is because the corner store was closed that night, and so my daddy ain't have a condom. You know, and so my mom, you know, and it's almost something like that, to where it was comical, because it was like, you know, and it was like, but it was really what I felt, because I felt like there was no thought through to what would happen from two parent or two adults playing adults or playing house or whatever the case may have been. And so I had to realize that even with me making such a harsh joke, that was the reality that I was always faced with. And so me saying that is realizing that Thank you. However I got here, I have to find a level of gratitude. Because if I continue to harbor on the how and the why and everything else, then I'm not gonna be able to see the other side. And I talked about this last night, being able to see the other side from the devastation of what you just experienced. And so the other side consists of stop asking all these questions that's trying to hold you to that, and start asking questions and start becoming what's needed on the other side of that pain. Because what's needed on the other side of that pain, as he redeems you and he redeems this story, he redeems this trauma or whatever it is in any capacity. If you're so focused on that pain and of that, you would never see that there is goodness on the other side of this. And I know it sounds crazy and everything else, but this is according to my faith and according to your faith, what the other side is going to look like. Because if you continue to try to keep finding every day, my daddy did this, or somebody so-and-so did this, they hurt me, then it's almost like you're saying, God, I only trust you an inch, or I only trust you a piece of why you want to redeem my story. And so we have to realize that God, you take this story and pull me out of the pit, pull me out of the darkness, and pull me to the other side so that I can see the purpose. Because as believers, we have to know that even in this, there is still goodness. Even in this, there is still redemption. And so I have to take my ownership and say, and not necessarily ownership, but I have to take my role and say, God, pull me to the other side. Pull me to the other side of what you want to do with this, and how you want my story to not just be my story, but it's a also story about others as well.
That's good. So I hear you saying, starting today, I need to embrace the fullness of who I am and not continuing to rehearse the pain.
Yeah.
You have to finding blame.
Yeah. Stop revisiting. I always say, like, stop talking to your past. Because the thing about it is that our past is our past is our past. And I'm not saying in the sense of don't revisit it in the sense so that you can get to healing, but you have to let that be your objective. Don't talk to your past so that you can sit there at the table and entertain it. I'm just coming for the information and I'm leaving. I'm just coming so that I can heal, and I'm leaving. But I think what happens sometimes, we get so caught up, and when we try to go back and journal and go back and revisit our past, and we have to be very cautious of this. So this is why I would encourage individuals to make sure that you have a safe place and individuals around you to support you, so that you don't get stuck with trying to focus or trying to heal from that past, because you're going to have to go back to a lot of things that happened to you. So make sure you're ready to go on this journey, but don't sit there and entertain and talk to your past, because your future is waiting on you. And if we realize that our future has so much more and our past was only a portion, I don't know about you, and I also talk about this in the book. I don't know about you, but I would feel devastated if I went to a restaurant and I'm watching everyone else around me, and the waiters are coming out with a full course meal, steak, potatoes, and broccoli and everything else with their favorite drink. And they come out and the server is coming to my table and they bring me a piece of a steak, not even a piece of a steak, a piece of potato, and one broccoli and some water. But I feel like we owe it to ourselves. If you sit there long enough and you did the work just as the other people who sitting in their restaurant and who sat there, you are deserving of the full portion. And so we have to stop. We have to come out of this thing to where we are only take a piece of what we have of our lives, because of the fact that we feel like we're not capable or we don't deserve it. But at the end of the day, we deserve the full portion. And so the full portion, when it comes to God and when it comes to trauma, God wants to give us so much healing that he's not going to only heal a portion of our story and of our trauma, but he's coming to heal the entire story, the entire thing, from day one to even to present, from the day you hit the earth and everything else to present. He wants to redeem and heal the entirety of your story, not a portion, not just 6 months of it, not just 1 year of it, not just 6 minutes of it, but the entire portion of your story. And so we have to realize that, hey, I deserve this. I deserve, God knows I deserve to receive the full portion, the full restoration and healing of my trauma. And so that is something that I will also encourage. Realize that you deserve this, the fullness of what God has for you.
So starting tonight, if I want to start this journey, I hear you saying, change your confession.
Change your confessions.
I love it.
Change your confessions. And that's what we talked about. I may have not have been great 6 months ago, but I'm becoming better. I'm doing my best. And my best is so much better than trying to identifying yourself as not good enough. Because even in that, my best is still something. To where 6 months ago I may not have had nothing, but my best is still something. And so we have to find value even in the little things. And I think that's something that you have to encourage yourself. Find value in the little things, because trauma has held you back so long and tried to convince you that even the little things, it disqualifies you. But honestly speaking, God can take the little things and make it into the big things. God can take the smallest thing, the smallest portion, our faith, that is a mustard seed, the smallest thing, and make it big. And we have to realize that even in that, the smallest thing is still good enough. But if we give nothing, we have nothing. But as long as we give something, we will see something.
I love it. That's it. That's all. That settles it. Period. Exclamation point.
Yeah.
Buy the book.
Yes. Please, guys, go ahead. Click the link. Click the link and buy the book. This journey is something that I enjoyed going on and staying consistent on, and just having to where others are sharing their story and feeling okay because I'm sharing my story. Now they feel a sign of relief. And so you want to make sure you go ahead and order the pre-sales. Everyone has $10 in their pocket, $10 for the pre-sale. And let me tell you something, this is just the beginning of what we will be doing, because I'm going to take this to what I know God is telling me to do. And we're going to have more conversations, more topics, and everything else to where we find our healing and we find the truth of it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for answering these questions, dropping these gems, and giving us some knowledge. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you guys for joining in, and I will talk to you soon. Stay tuned. Go ahead, click the link right now and share. All right. Share, like, do all those things that you're supposed to do. Let's get this book out there. All right. I love you guys. Have an amazing night.